The sound a wheelchair makes when it cracks is not loud, but it lives in your bones forever. It is a small splintering, a quiet snap of carbon fiber and aluminum, the kind of noise you only really hear because the room has gone silent around it. That was the sound I heard on Thanksgiving Day in 2025, right after my sister, Marlena, shoved my son out of his seat and onto the dining room floor, and right before my father threw his head back and laughed like he had just heard the funniest joke of his life. My name is Camilla Reyes. I am 37 years old, and until that afternoon, I honestly believed that nothing my family did could surprise me anymore. I was wrong. I had been wrong about them for a very long time, but I did not understand the size of my wrongness until my phone started buzzing against my thigh while my 8-year-old son Mateo was lying on the floor in a tangle of broken metal, trying very hard not to cry in front of the people who had hurt him. Let me back up a little, because the moment will not make sense without the years that built it. I grew up in a tall white house on Juniper Lane in a small town outside of Sacramento, California. My father, Hector Reyes, made his money in commercial real estate, the kind that smells like cologne and fresh asphalt. My mother, Delphina, died when I was 11, and after her funeral my father remarried a woman named Yvette within 14 months. Yvette already had a daughter, Marlena, who was a year younger than me, and from the second she stepped into the white house on Juniper Lane, she made one thing very clear. There was only enough light in that family for one daughter, and it was not going to be me. My father did not push back on this. He liked easy things. He liked Yvette because she did not ask him hard questions, and he liked Marlena because she was loud and pretty and laughed at everything he said. I was quiet. I read books. I looked too much like my mother, and I think that was the real problem. Every time he looked at me, he saw the woman he had not saved, and so he stopped looking at me at all. By the time I was 16, I had stopped trying. I worked at a sandwich shop after school, saved every dollar, and the week after I graduated high school in 2006, I packed my old gray Civic and drove 300 miles south to start nursing school. My father did not come to my graduation. He told me he had a closing that day. I found out later he had taken Marlena to a horse show. I built my life slowly and with my own 2 hands. I became a pediatric nurse. I worked nights in the children of the hospital for 9 years, and during the day I went back to school for my nurse practitioner license. In 2014, I married a kind, soft-spoken man named Daniel Pike, who taught middle school history and made me laugh until my stomach hurt. In 2017, we had Mateo. He was born 7 weeks early and spent 23 days in the neonatal intensive care unit, and somewhere in those 23 days, a small bleed in his tiny brain changed the way his legs would work for the rest of his life. He has cerebral palsy. He is also the brightest, funniest, most stubborn child I have ever met. Daniel died in a car accident on a wet stretch of Interstate 80 in March of 2021. A truck driver fell asleep at the wheel and crossed 3 lanes. Mateo was 3 years old. I was 33. I did not know how to be a widow and a single mother and a nurse practitioner all at the same time, but I learned, because that is what you do when a small boy is looking up at you waiting to see if the world is still safe. I drove a 2009 Honda Odyssey minivan with a hand crank wheelchair ramp that I had installed myself with a YouTube tutorial and a borrowed drill. The paint was peeling on the hood. The passenger side mirror was held on with black electrical tape. It was not pretty, but it carried Mateo and his chair and his school backpack and his oxygen tank on the bad days, and I loved that ugly van the way you love something that has kept you alive. My grandfather on the other side of the family was a man named Agustin Vega. He was my mother of the side, my mother of the father, and after my mother died, he was the only piece of her I had left. He lived 4 hours away in a quiet stone house in the hills above Carmel, and he was not the kind of grandfather who sent birthday cards. He was the kind who sent letters, 3 pages long, written in fountain pen, asking what I was reading and whether I had learned to listen to my own gut yet. He had built a private holdings company in the 1970s called Vega Coastal Group, and I knew it was successful, but I did not know the size of it. He never spoke about money. He spoke about character. He used to say that the loudest person in the room is almost never the richest, and the richest person in the room is almost never the kindest, and the kindest person in the room is the only one worth following home. Agustin had visited us twice a year since Daniel died. He adored Matteo. He sat on the floor with him and built train tracks for hours, even when his old knees hurt. He never mentioned my father, his own son-in-law, and he never mentioned Marlena, and I understood without being told that he had taken my measure and theirs a long time ago. Augustin died on October 9th of 2025. A stroke, in his sleep, in his own bed, in the stone house above Carmel. I drove up for the funeral with Matteo in the backseat singing along to a song from a cartoon, not understanding why his mother was crying behind her sunglasses. My father was there. Yvette was there. Marlena was there, in a black dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. They sat in the front row like they belonged there. I sat 3 rows back with my son because nobody had saved us a seat. After the service, my father walked up to me on the church steps and put a hand on my shoulder, the first time he had touched me in maybe 4 years. He said, "Camilla, we should talk soon." The old man left some things to sort out. I nodded. I did not know what he meant, and I did not particularly care. I had just lost the last person on earth who wrote me letters in fountain pen. That was 6 weeks before Thanksgiving. The invitation to Thanksgiving came from Yvette, by text, on the Monday before the holiday. "We are doing dinner at 4, she wrote. "Bring something if you want. Your father wants to see Matteo." I read that text 3 times in the break room of the clinic where I worked, and I almost said no. I had not spent a Thanksgiving with my father since 2018. But there was a small, soft part of me, the 11-year-old who still lived somewhere behind my ribs, that heard the words "your father wants to see Matteo," and could not help leaning toward them like a plant leans toward a window. So I said yes. I baked a pumpkin pie from my mother of recipe card, the one in her loopy handwriting. I dressed Matteo in a navy blue sweater and combed his dark curls down flat, which lasted about 90 seconds. I put his good wheelchair in the van, the lightweight one we had saved for 2 years to buy, the one with the bright green frame he had picked out himself because he said it looked like a race car. I drove the 3 hours to Juniper Lane with my hands at 10 and 2 and a feeling in my stomach like swallowed gravel. When I pulled into the long curved driveway, Marlena was standing on the front porch in cream-colored pants and a silk blouse, holding a glass of wine, watching me park. I saw her eyes flick over the peeling hood of the van, the taped mirror, the wheelchair ramp folded against the side door. I saw her smile, the small private smile she had been giving me since we were 12 years old. And I knew, before I had even unbuckled my seatbelt, that this dinner was not going to end the way Yvette had promised. The front door of the house on Juniper Lane was the same heavy oak door I had grown up walking through, and it still stuck a little on the bottom hinge, and somehow that small detail was the thing that almost made me turn around and drive home. I did not turn around. I lowered the ramp, I rolled Matteo down into the cold afternoon air, and I walked my son up the slate path toward a family he barely knew. Yvette opened the door before I could knock. She had aged in the way that wealthy women age, which is to say not at all on the surface and all at once underneath. She wore a cashmere sweater the color of dry sand and a thin gold chain at her throat. She looked at Matteo first, and her smile did the small, tight thing it always did around him, like she was trying to remember which face to make. Then she looked at me and said, "Camilla, you look tired," in the voice of a woman who was telling you that you looked old. I said, "Thank you for having us." I had practiced the sentence in the van. It came out flat. The house smelled like rosemary and butter, and the particular kind of expensive candle that costs more than groceries. Marlena drifted in from the kitchen with her wine glass and bent down toward Matteo with the exaggerated softness adults use on children they do not actually like. "Hello, little man," she said. "Look at you in your fancy chair." Matteo, who is 8 and not stupid, gave her the polite nod he gives strangers at the grocery store and then looked up at me for rescue. My father was in the den, in his leather chair, watching a football game with the volume too loud. He did not stand up when I walked in. He lifted his glass of bourbon in a small salute and said, "There she is. Still driving that beat-up minivan, I see." He said it with a grin, the way other fathers might say nice haircut. Marlena laughed from the doorway, a little tinkling laugh, and Yvette pretended not to hear, which was its own kind of agreement. I felt my face get hot, but I had been practicing for this too. I said, "It runs fine, Dad. Matteo and I do not need anything fancy." I parked Matteo's chair near the coffee table and sat on the arm of the couch and pretended to watch the game. The next hour was a slow performance of a family. Yvette gave a tour of her new kitchen renovation, which had cost, she mentioned twice, $95,000. Marlena talked about her boyfriend, an investment banker named Preston who could not make it because he was skiing in Aspen. My father talked about a strip mall he had bought in Roseville. Nobody asked me about my job. Nobody asked Mateo about school. When Mateo tried to tell my father about the science fair project he had won second place in, about a small motor he had built that ran on a lemon battery, my father said, "That is nice, buddy," and turned back to the television before Mateo had finished his sentence. I watched my son of face do the thing it does when he is disappointed but trying to be brave. It is a very small thing. His lower lip goes still, and his eyebrows lift just a quarter inch, like he is asking a question he already knows the answer to. I have seen that face too many times, and every time I see it I want to pick him up and run. Dinner was called at 4:30. The dining room was beautiful in the way that magazines are beautiful, which is to say it did not look like anyone actually lived in it. There were 8 chairs around the long table, even though there were only 5 of us. Yvette had set a place at the end for Mateo, but the chair she had pulled up was a tall, hard-backed thing with no support for his torso. I explained, as gently as I could, that Mateo needed to stay in his wheelchair because of his trunk control. Yvette pressed her lips together and said, of course, in a voice that meant she found this inconvenient. I rolled Mateo to the end of the table. The wheelchair was a little too tall for the table edge, so I leaned down and adjusted the seat height, and I made sure his plate was within reach. He grinned up at me, that gap-toothed grin, and whispered, "Mom, the rolls smell so good." I kissed the top of his head and sat down beside him. My father stood up at the head of the table to carve the turkey. He gave a small speech about being grateful for family, and for the year of growth, and for the legacy of his late father-in-law, by which he meant my grandfather Augustin, and at the word legacy, I saw Marlena and Yvette exchange a glance so quick I almost missed it. Almost. The meal began, plates were passed. Mateo asked for a roll and I buttered it for him, and he ate it in 3 big happy bites. For about 20 minutes, I let myself believe that maybe this was going to be okay. Maybe we would get through one meal. Maybe my father had meant something when he said he wanted to see his grandson. Then Marlena set down her fork and said, "So, Camilla, have you heard from the lawyer yet? About grandfather of estate?" I looked up. I said no. I did not even know there was a lawyer to hear from. I assumed Augustin had left everything to charity or to a foundation. He had mentioned a foundation in one of his letters. Marlena smiled. "Well," she said, "Mom and Dad and I had a sit-down with the family attorney last week. There are some things being worked out. It is going to be a lot, Camilla, a lot. We just want to make sure everyone is, on the same page. My father said we are family after all, we share." I said nothing. I picked up my water glass to have something to do with my hands. Yvette said, "Of course, your father and I have been talking about how it would be smart for the estate to be managed by people with experience. Marlena has been working at the company. Did you know that? 3 days a week. She has really learned the business." I had not known. Marlena had a degree in fashion, merchandising from a small private college, and had never held a job for more than 14 months in her entire adult life. The idea of her working 3 days a week at Vega Coastal Group was so absurd I almost laughed. Instead I said, "That is wonderful for her." My father leaned forward. He looked at me with the small mean glint I remembered from childhood, the one that came out when he had decided to put me in my place. He said, "Camilla, look, you are a nurse. You drive a van that should be in a junkyard. You have a kid with a lot of, needs. The smart thing here is to let the people who know about money handle the money. We are not trying to cut you out. We just want what is best for everyone, including Mateo." The word Mateo in his mouth, used that way, made something in my chest go very quiet and very cold. I said, "I have not even spoken to a lawyer, Dad. I do not know what is in the will. Neither do you, I am guessing. So maybe we should not be having this conversation over the cranberry sauce." Marlena laughed. She actually laughed, that same tinkling laugh, and she said, "Oh, Camilla, do not be like that. Do not be difficult. You have always been so difficult." And that was when Mateo, who had been quietly eating his mashed potatoes and listening to every word, set down his little fork and said, in his clear high voice, "Do not talk to my mom like that." The whole table went still. Marlena turned her head toward my son very slowly, and the smile she gave him was not a smile. Marlena stood up from her chair. I remember that part very clearly, the way she pushed back from the table with both hands flat on the wood, the way her wine glass wobbled and almost tipped. She walked around the long table toward Matteo Avend, and I started to stand up too, because every instinct in my body was already screaming. She crouched down next to his wheelchair. She put her face very close to his face, close enough that I could see Matteo lean back a little into his headrest. She said, in a sweet sing-song voice, "Sweetie, the grown-ups are talking. You need to learn to stay out of grown-up conversations. Did your mommy not teach you that?" Matteo looked at her. He has these huge brown eyes, the same eyes Daniel had, and they do not blink much when he is concentrating. He said, very calmly, "You were being mean to her." Marlena straightened up. She looked at me over Matteo's head and she said, "See, this is what I am talking about. This is what happens when a kid is raised by one parent with no discipline. He has no respect." I stood up. I said, "Marlena, sit down. We are leaving." I started to move around the table to get to my son. I was going to grab the handles of his chair and roll him out of that house and never come back. I had my keys in my pocket. I had already decided. But Marlena got there first. She stepped behind Matteo's chair, and she put both hands on the handles, and she said, "Oh, do not be dramatic, Camilla. We are having a nice family dinner. Sit down." And then she yanked the chair backward, hard, away from the table. The wheelchair was a lightweight pediatric model with a tilt mechanism, designed to recline gently for kids who needed pressure relief. It was not designed to be jerked backward by an adult woman who weighed 140 pounds and was wearing high heels on a polished hardwood floor. Marlena pulled too hard, the chair tipped, her heels slipped, and the whole thing went sideways. Matteo fell. He fell from the chair onto the hardwood floor, and the chair came down on top of him, and one of the lightweight footrests, the carbon fiber one, snapped clean in half against the leg of the dining table. The seat frame buckled. A wheel popped off its axle and rolled 3 feet across the floor and stopped against the baseboard. Matteo did not scream. That is the part I will remember when I am 80. He did not scream. He made a small sound, a small soft "oh," like he had dropped a toy. He landed on his hip and his shoulder, and his head bounced once against the floor, not hard but enough. I was around the table in maybe a second and a half. I was on my knees next to him. I had my hands on his face. I was saying, "Baby, baby, look at me, look at Mom. Where does it hurt? Can you wiggle your fingers? Can you wiggle your toes?" All of it in one long string because I am a nurse, and that is what my brain does in a crisis. Matteo blinked up at me. His eyes were wet but not spilling. He said, "Mom, my dear." And then, behind me, I heard it. My father laughed. It was not a small laugh. It was not a nervous laugh, the kind people make when something terrible happens and they do not know what to do. It was a real laugh from the belly, the kind you laugh at a comedy show. He said, between laughs, "Oh my God, Marlena, you are a menace. Look at this mess." Yvette said, "Hector, do not," in a soft voice that was not really an objection. Marlena was standing over us with her hand over her mouth. She said, "Oh, Camilla, I am so sorry. I did not mean to pull that hard. That chair is so flimsy. You really should get him a better one." I did not look at her. I did not look at my father. I scooped Matteo up off the floor, all 44 pounds of him, and I held him against my chest. He was shaking. Not crying, just shaking, the way small animals shake when they have been frightened badly. I could feel his little heart going through his sweater. I said into his hair, "I have got you. Mom has got you. We are going home." I carried him out of that dining room. I did not stop for my coat. I did not stop for the broken wheelchair. I walked past my father, who was still chuckling and shaking his head, and I walked past Yvette, who had her napkin pressed against her lips, and I walked past Marlena, who was already reaching for her wine glass like nothing had happened, and I walked out the front door into the cold November dusk. I got him into the van. I buckled him into the booster seat we kept in the back for short trips when the chair was not usable. His sweater had a small smear of cranberry sauce on the sleeve. His curls were sticking up where he had hit the floor. I checked his pupils with the flashlight on my phone, equal and reactive. I checked his hip, his shoulder, his head. Nothing swelling, nothing deformed. He would have bruises, he would have nightmares. But he was, in the medical sense, okay. I closed the side door of the van. I stood in the driveway for 1 second and put both my hands on the cold metal and breathed. That was when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I almost did not look. I had every reason not to look. But it buzzed 3 times in quick succession, which on my phone meant a call, not a text. I pulled it out. The screen said, "Unknown caller, Carmel, California." I answered it. I said, "This is Camilla." A man of voice came on. He was older, careful, with the slight rasp of someone who had been on the phone all day. He said, "Mrs. Reyes, my name is Jonas Albright. I am the senior estate attorney for the estate of your grandfather, Augustin Vega. I apologize for calling on Thanksgiving evening. I have been trying to reach you for 2 weeks. Your contact information in our file was outdated, and I had to track down your clinic to get a current number. Is this a good time?" I looked at the front window of the house on Juniper Lane. Through the glass, I could see my father sitting back down at the head of the table. I could see Marlena pouring herself more wine. I could see Yvette laughing at something Marlena had said. I said, "Yes, Mr. Albright, this is a fine time." He said, "Mrs. Reyes, I will not bury the lead. Your grandfather of will was finalized in March of 2024 and amended one final time in August of 2025, 6 weeks before his passing. Under the terms of that will, you are named the sole heir to the entire Vega estate. That includes his personal holdings, his real property, his private investment accounts, and his controlling 94% stake in Vega Coastal Group. The total value of the estate, as of the most recent audit, is approximately $9 billion. The cold air went out of my lungs. I did not say anything. I could not. He said, "Mrs. Reyes, are you still there?" I said, "I am here." He said, "Your grandfather left a letter for you to be opened in my presence at the reading. The reading is scheduled for next Monday at 10 in the morning at our office in Carmel. There are some specific instructions in the will I will need to walk you through. Some of them are time-sensitive." He was very particular about how this was to be handled, especially regarding your father and his current wife and stepdaughter. I looked at the window again. My father was carving more turkey. He was smiling. I said, "Mr. Albright, can I ask you one question?" He said, "Of course." I said, "Does my father know?" There was a small pause. Mr. Albright said, "Your father was informed last week that he was not named in the will. He was not given the name of the heir. He was told only that the heir is, quote, a family member who has demonstrated the character your grandfather valued. He has been calling our office every day since. I have not returned his calls." I felt something move inside my chest. It was not joy. It was not anger. It was something quieter and older than both of those things. It felt like my grandfather of hand, on the top of my head, the way he used to rest it there when I was a child. I said, "I will see you Monday at 10. I hung up. I got in the driver's seat. I looked in the rearview mirror at my son, who was watching me with those huge, tired eyes. I said, "Mateo, we are going to be okay. We are going to be very, very okay." He said, "Mom, why are you smiling?" I said, "Because your great-grandpa loved you, and he loved me, and he saw everything." I started the engine. The old van coughed twice and turned over, the way it always did. I backed out of the driveway of the house on Juniper Lane for what I did not yet know would be the last time. As I turned onto the main road, my phone lit up again. This time it was a text from my father. It said, "Camilla, come back inside. Your sister is upset. We need to talk as a family." I did not answer. I drove my son home. The drive back to our little house in Folsom took 3 hours and 18 minutes, and I do not remember most of it. I remember Mateo falling asleep around the 2nd hour, his head tilted against the seatbelt, his breath fogging the window. I remember stopping once at a gas station to buy him a chocolate milk and a small bag of pretzels because he had not finished his dinner. I remember the cashier of name tag said Brenda, and Brenda looked at my face and said, "Honey, are you okay?" And I said, "I am going to be," which I think was the most honest sentence I had said all day. I remember the number, $9 billion. I kept saying it inside my head like a foreign word, turning it over, trying to make it mean something. I could not. $9 billion was not a number. It was a weather system. It was something that happened to other people in newspapers. We got home a little after 9. I carried Mateo from the van to his bedroom and put him in his pajamas without waking him up, which is a skill I had developed during a lifetime of long shifts and longer drives. I checked him over one more time. His left hip was already showing a pink bloom that would be a serious bruise by morning. His shoulder had a smaller mark. His head was fine. I sat on the edge of his bed for a long time after he was asleep. I watched him breathe. I thought about the wheelchair, snapped in half on a stranger of dining room floor, abandoned the way you abandon a piece of trash. That chair had cost us $4,200. We had saved for it for 2 years. I had picked up extra weekend shifts. Mateo had given up his birthday presents 1 year to put the money into the chair fund. He had handed me the cash from his little envelope and said, "Mom, I want to be able to go fast." I went into the kitchen. I poured myself a small glass of the cheap wine I kept in the fridge for the once a month I drank. I sat at the kitchen table and I opened my laptop and I started a document. I titled it simply Monday, and I began to write down everything I needed to do. The first thing I wrote was, call the wheelchair company. Order a replacement, identical model, expedited shipping, do not worry about the cost. That sentence, do not worry about the cost, was the first sentence of my new life. I stared at it for a long minute before I moved on. The second thing I wrote was, document of the injuries. Photographs, dated, time-stamped. Pediatrician visit Friday morning, get a written report. This was the nurse in me, but it was also something else. It was a small cold thing waking up inside me, a thing that had been asleep my whole life, a thing that understood that I now had power, and I needed to learn how to hold it without dropping it on anyone afoot, including my own. The third thing I wrote was, call Mr. Albright Friday. Ask about NDA, ask about what I can say to my family, ask about security. I wrote until 2 in the morning. I made a list of the questions I wanted to ask the lawyer. I made a list of the people I needed to tell and the people I did not. I made a list of the things in our little house I wanted to keep no matter what, things like the rocking chair Daniel had refinished by hand and the painted ceramic bowl Mateo had made me in 2nd grade. I made a list, on the back of a junk mail envelope, of every cruel thing my father had ever said to me that I could remember. The list was longer than I had expected. When I was done, I folded the envelope in half and put it inside a book on the shelf, because I did not want to read it again, but I did not want to throw it away. I slept maybe 4 hours. In the morning, Mateo woke up sore but cheerful. He limped a little on the way to the bathroom. He asked, very seriously, over his cereal, "Mom, is Aunt Marlena going to come to my school again like she said last year?" I said, "No, baby. Aunt Marlena is not going to come to your school. Not last year, not this year, not ever." He nodded, like he had expected that answer, and went back to his cereal. Children know things, they just do not always have the words. I called the wheelchair company at 8 in the morning. I explained what had happened. I left out the family part and said only that there had been an accident. The woman on the phone, whose name was Carla, was kind. She said expedited shipping was 4 to 6 business days. I asked if there was anything faster. She said, well, for an extra $1,200 we can do next day. I said, do next day? She paused and said, "Ma'am, are you sure?" I said, "I am sure." She processed the order. The new chair would arrive Tuesday afternoon. Then I called my clinic and told them I was using my emergency personal days for the rest of the week. My supervisor, a woman named Patricia who had hired me 4 years ago and who had let me leave early more times than I could count when Mateo got sick, said, "Camilla, are you safe?" I said, "Yes, I just need some time." She said, "Take what you need." At 10 in the morning, my father called. I let it go to voicemail. He called again at 10:06, and again at 10:15, and again at 10:30. Between 10 in the morning and noon, he called 11 times. Then Yvette called twice. Then Marlena called once and left a voicemail. I listened to the voicemail while I was folding laundry. Marlena, a voice came on, light and warm, the voice she used for people she wanted something from. She said, "Hi, sis. Listen, I feel really, really bad about last night. The chair was just so flimsy and I tripped on my heel, and I know Mateo got a little bump and I want to make it right. Can I send you some money for a new chair? Just text me an amount. Also, Mom and Dad really want to talk. Dad got a phone call last night that has him pretty worked up. Anyway, call me back. Love you. I deleted the voicemail. I did not text her an amount. At 2 in the afternoon, my father called for the 12th time. I answered. I do not know why. Maybe because I wanted to hear his voice now that I knew. Maybe because the small girl inside me still wanted, after all of it, to be invited back to the table. He said, Camilla, finally, where are you? I said, at home, Dad. Where would I be? He said, look, about last night, your sister feels terrible. You overreacted. The kid is fine. We need to talk about something more important now. The kid, he said, the kid. I said, his name is Mateo. He said, right. Listen, I got a call from a lawyer, from your grandfather of lawyer. He would not tell me anything specific, but he was very, very cagey. He kept saying I was not in the will. Camilla, that cannot be right. Your mother was Augustin' only child. I was his son-in-law for 14 years. There is no way that old man left me out. There has to be a mistake. We need to go up there together, you and me, and figure this out. As a family. I said, as a family. He said, yes, Camilla. As a family, I know we have had our differences. But this is a lot of money we are talking about. Augustin was worth a lot. We need to handle this carefully together so we get what is fair. I held the phone away from my ear for a second. I looked out the kitchen window at my backyard, at the little raised garden bed Mateo and I had built together, at the rusted swing set we had bought second-hand from a neighbor. I put the phone back to my ear. I said, Dad, can I ask you a question? He said, of course, sweetheart. The word sweetheart, in his mouth, was the most expensive word I had ever heard. I said, when Marlena dumped my son on the floor last night, why did you laugh? There was a silence. Then he said, oh, come on, it was not like that. I was just surprised. It was a reflex. Do not turn this into something it was not. I said, Dad, I am going to hang up now. I am not going to Carmel with you. I will not be calling you back. Please do not call me again. He said, Camilla, wait, do not be ridiculous. This is your family. I said, you are right, he is, and I hung up. I blocked his number. I blocked Yvette of number. I blocked Marlena of number. It took me about 40 seconds and I felt my hands shake the entire time, not from fear. From something else, something like waking up. I sat down at the kitchen table. Mateo came in dragging his stuffed dinosaur by the tail. He climbed into my lap, which was harder for him than for other kids, and he put his head against my collarbone. He said, Mom, are you crying? I said, a little bit, baby, but it is the good kind. He said, there is a good kind. I said, yes. Sometimes when something old finally ends, you cry because you are free. He thought about that. He said, like when school is out for summer. I laughed. I said, yes, exactly like that. We sat there for a long time. The afternoon light came through the kitchen window and made a yellow square on the table. I held my son, and I waited for Monday. Monday morning, I drove to Carmel in a rental car. Mr. Albright had suggested it on a follow-up call Friday, very gently, that the minivan with the California plates and the wheelchair ramp might draw attention now that certain people knew certain things. He said, Mrs. Reyes, the news of an heir to an estate this size tends to travel quickly inside certain circles. I would prefer that we control the timing. I had not thought about that. I had not thought about any of it. I picked up a beige sedan from an airport rental counter and drove the 4 hours north with my hands tight on the wheel. Mateo stayed with my best friend Henrietta, who had been my neighbor since 2019 and who treated my son like her own. Henrietta did not ask questions when I dropped him off at 7 in the morning. She just took his backpack and said, we are going to have pancakes and watch a movie, and you are going to go do whatever brave thing you are doing. I had not told her any numbers. I had told her only that there were some legal things to sort out about my grandfather. She had nodded like that was all she needed to know. The office of Mr. Albright was on the second floor of a quiet stone building 2 blocks from the ocean. The reception area had a small fountain and a bowl of green apples on the table. A woman with silver hair and red glasses looked up when I walked in and said, Mrs. Reyes, he is ready for you. She did not ask my name. She knew it. Mr. Albright was a tall, thin man in his late 60s with a careful gray suit and a tie the color of a winter sky. He stood up from behind his desk when I came in and shook my hand with both of his. He said, "Camilla, may I call you Camilla? I knew your grandfather for 31 years." I said, "Yes, please." He sat me down in a leather chair across from his desk. He poured me a cup of coffee from a small silver pot. He asked, in a careful, quiet voice, how my son was doing, and I realized he had remembered the small thing I had told him on Friday about the wheelchair. He said, "We can take this at whatever pace you need." I said, "I am ready." He opened a leather folder on his desk. He said, "Before we go through the documents, your grandfather wanted you to read this." He handed me an envelope. The envelope had my name on it in fountain pen, in the loopy slanted handwriting I knew better than my own. I opened it. There were 3 pages, folded carefully. I read them in that quiet office while the silver-haired woman brought a fresh pot of coffee and the fountain bubbled in the next room. "My dear Camilla," the letter began. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and the world will keep turning, which is a great relief to a tired old man. I have made you the heir of everything I own. I want you to read the next sentence twice. I did not do this because you are my granddaughter. I did this because of who you are. I have watched you, Camilla, since you were a small girl in pigtails who read books at the back of family parties because nobody had bothered to talk to you. I watched you lose your mother and not be allowed to grieve her. I watched your father bring that woman and her child into the house your mother had made, and I watched him forget the name of his own daughter for the sake of a quiet life. I watched you leave. I watched you build something with your own 2 hands. I watched you marry a kind man and become a mother and lose your husband and keep being a mother anyway. I watched you raise a son with extra needs and never once make him feel like a burden. I watched the way that little boy looks at you. A child of face does not lie. Your son looks at you the way I used to watch your grandmother. That is the highest praise I know how to give." The letter went on. It told me the things I needed to know and the things he wanted me to know. He told me he had watched my father try to borrow money from the company twice, in 2019 and in 2022, and had been refused both times. He told me that Marlena had reached out to him in 2024 asking to be put on the board of Vega Coastal Group, with no business experience and no degree in any related field, and that he had politely declined. He told me that Yvette had once, at a Christmas party in 2016, told him to his face that I was, quote, "the difficult one," and he had not forgotten. He told me he was not leaving me this estate to hurt them. He was leaving it to me because I was the only person in his entire bloodline who had asked for nothing. The last paragraph said this: "Camilla, money is a tool. It builds or it breaks. I am giving you a tool large enough to do enormous good. You will know what to do with it because you already know how to take care of people who cannot take care of themselves. That is the only skill that matters. The lawyers will tell you everything else. Take care of my great-grandson. Tell him I loved him. Tell him his great-grandpa thought he was the brightest kid he ever met. Tell him to keep building things. Love, Grandpa." I folded the letter. I set it on my lap. I did not cry. I think I had used up all my crying on the drive. Mr. Albright waited. When I looked up, he said, "Are you ready for the rest?" I said yes. He walked me through the will, page by page. The estate was structured in a few different ways for tax purposes. There was a personal trust in my name that held real property and liquid assets, valued at approximately $1.4 billion. There was a controlling stake in Vega Coastal Group, which had been independently audited the previous quarter at a value of approximately $7.6 billion. There was a separate small trust set up for Mateo, valued at $50 million, that would pay for his medical care, his education, and his living expenses for the rest of his life, and which I controlled until he turned 30. There was also a foundation, my grandfather of Own Foundation, which he had funded with $200 million over the course of his life, that focused on pediatric medical research and access to mobility equipment for low-income families. The foundation existed already. He had set it up in 2011. He had never told me about it. The foundation was, in his will, to be turned over to my direction, with full authority to expand its mission as I saw fit. I sat in that leather chair, and I thought about the $4,200 wheelchair my son had ridden in until Saturday night. I thought about the YouTube tutorial I had used to install our ramp. I thought about the families in my clinic who waited 18 months for insurance to approve a piece of equipment a child needed today. I said, Mr. Albright, the foundation, I would like to expand it, significantly. He smiled for the first time that morning. He said, your grandfather said you would say that. He told me, and I am quoting him directly, he said, Jonas, the first thing she will do is give some of it away. Watch. There was a clause in the will, near the bottom, that I had not noticed on my first pass. Mr. Albright pointed to it. He said, Camilla, I need to draw your attention to this section. Your grandfather left specific instructions regarding your father and stepfamily. He read it aloud. The clause said that under no circumstances was any portion of the estate, the trust, or the foundation to be distributed, gifted, loaned, or otherwise transferred to Hector Reyes, Yvette Reyes, or Marlena Castle, by direct payment or by intermediary, during the lifetime of the named heir Camilla Reyes. Any attempt by these named individuals to contest the will, harass the heir, or interfere with the management of the estate would trigger a separate clause, funded with $5 million from the estate, dedicated specifically to legal defense against such actions. Mr. Albright looked up at me. He said, your grandfather anticipated that they might try something. He wanted you protected. The $5 million sits in a separate account that I administer. If they come at you, in any form, we have resources to meet them. I said, he thought of everything. Mr. Albright said, he loved you, Camilla. He talked about you almost every time we met. He used to say, my granddaughter does not know yet how strong she is. I am going to leave her something so she finds out. I sat with that, I sat with all of it. Mr. Albright cleared his throat. He said, there is one more thing. The reading of the will, in its full formal sense, will happen in 2 weeks at this office. It is customary for any named parties to be present. Your father, your stepmother, and your stepsister are not named, so they will not be invited. But they are entitled, by California law, to be notified that they were excluded. I will be sending that notice via certified mail tomorrow morning. They will receive it Wednesday or Thursday at the latest. After that, they will know, in writing, that you received everything. I thought about Thanksgiving night. I thought about my father saying, still driving that beat-up minivan. I thought about Marlena laughing as my son lay on the floor. I thought about the certified letter arriving in the mailbox at Juniper Lane, in the hand of a postman who did not know what he was carrying. I said, Mr. Albright, send the letters. He said, consider it done. The certified letters arrived at the house on Juniper Lane on Wednesday, December 3rd, at 11 in the morning. I know the exact time because Mr. Albright had arranged a tracking confirmation and he texted me a screenshot. I was at my clinic that day, doing a well-child visit on a little girl named Sage who had a peanut allergy. I felt my phone buzz. I read the screenshot between patients. I put the phone back in my pocket and I went and checked on a child of throat. I did not feel triumph. I did not feel anything, really. I felt the way you feel after you have been holding something heavy for a long time and you finally set it down. A kind of trembling stillness in your arms. My father did not call that day because of course I had blocked him, but he found other ways. At 3:30 in the afternoon, my supervisor Patricia knocked on the door of the small office where I did my paperwork between patients. She said, Camilla, there is a man at the front desk asking for you. He says he is your father. He is upset. I closed my eyes. I said, Patricia, I am sorry. I do not want to see him. Can you tell him I am with a patient and ask him to leave? Patricia, who was 60 years old and built like a small fierce bird, said, honey, I will tell him whatever you need me to tell him. I will also call the sheriff if he does not leave. Is that the situation we are in? I said it might be. She nodded and walked out. I heard her voice in the lobby, calm and very firm. I heard my father a voice, louder than it should have been in a pediatric clinic, saying my name. I heard Patricia say, sir, I am going to have to ask you to lower your voice. There are children in this clinic. There was some more talking. Then I heard the front door of the clinic chime, and Patricia came back into my office. She said, he left. He sat in the parking lot for about 10 minutes in his car, and then he drove away. I took down his license plate, just in case. You let me know if he comes back. I said, thank you, Patricia. She said, Camilla, I do not know what is happening in your life right now, but I have known you for 4 years and I have never seen you scared. You look scared today, so I am going to say this. Whatever it is, you do not have to do it alone. I almost told her. The words almost came out. I have a fortune. I have $9 billion and a foundation and a lawyer and a clause for legal defense. I am not the woman you hired 4 years ago, but what came out instead was, thank you. I will let you know if I need anything. She squeezed my shoulder and walked out. I picked Mateo up from school in the rental car because I had returned the van to the dealership to be looked at, a small task in the long list of things on my Monday document. He climbed into the back seat in his new green wheelchair, which had arrived Tuesday as promised, and which he had hugged like a long-lost friend. He told me about a math game they had played in class. He told me a girl named Priya had given him half her cookie. He was happy. When we got home, there was a man standing on my front porch. He was not my father. He was a younger man, maybe 40, in a dark coat with a small leather folder under his arm. I stopped the car at the bottom of the driveway and I did not get out. I rolled down the window. I said, "Can I help you?" He said, "Mrs. Reyes, my name is Vincent Caro. I am an attorney. I represent your father, Hector Reyes. I have been retained to discuss the terms of your grandfather of will. May I have a few minutes of your time?" My heart was beating in my throat. I said, "Mr. Caro, I am not going to discuss anything with you on my front porch with my son in the car. If you have business with me, please contact my attorney, Jonas Albright, at his office in Carmel. He is expecting your call." I started to roll the window up. He said, "Mrs. Reyes, your father is prepared to contest the will on grounds of undue influence and diminished capacity. We have documentation. This can be resolved quietly, or it can be very public. He thought you should have a chance to hear his terms before things escalate." I rolled the window back down. I said, "Mr. Caro, I am going to say this once. My grandfather signed his last amendment in August of 2025. He was 84 years old, sharp as a knife, and he had been working full-time at his company until 2 weeks before his death. There is no diminished capacity to argue. There is no undue influence. I had not seen him for 67 days before he died. My father is going to lose, and he is going to spend a great deal of money losing, and at the end of it, he will still not see $1 of the estate. You can tell him I said that. Or you cannot tell him. That is between you and your client. Now please get off my porch. My son needs to come inside." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, very quietly, almost like he was off the record, "Mrs. Reyes, may I make a suggestion? As one professional to another. If you have any inclination to settle this matter privately, even for a small amount, it would save everyone enormous trouble. Family fights of this size tend to get ugly in ways nobody anticipates." I said, "Mr. Caro, my son was dumped out of his wheelchair onto a hardwood floor on Thanksgiving by my stepsister, while my father laughed. That is the kind of ugly my family is capable of. I am not afraid of more of it. I am afraid of less of it being held accountable. Now please leave." He nodded. He walked down the porch steps, got into a black sedan parked across the street, and drove away. I pulled into my driveway. Mateo in the back seat said, "Mom, who is that man?" I said, "Just a person who works for Grandpa Hector. He was leaving a message. He is gone now." Mateo said, "I do not like him." I said, "You have good instincts, baby. You can keep them." That night, after Mateo was in bed, I called Mr. Albright. I told him about the visit. He listened without interrupting. When I was done, he said, "Camilla, this was actually helpful. Mr. Caro approaching you directly, without going through me, is an ethical lapse. It is also documented now, because I have been recording all of our calls with consent. We have an opening. I am going to file a motion tomorrow to formally bar your father and his counsel from any direct contact with you. We will also put a small protective order in place to keep him away from your home and your workplace. It is not a restraining order, not yet. It is one step before that. It tells the world we mean business." I said, "Do it." He said, "There is one more thing I want to bring up. I have been thinking about your son and about what happened Thanksgiving. I am not a criminal attorney, but what your stepsister did, when you describe it to me, sounds like it could meet the standard for assault on a minor in California, particularly because of the disability involved. There are enhanced penalties. I am not telling you to pursue that. That is your decision. But I want you to know the option exists and that we have witnesses, in the form of your stepmother and your father, who were present, even if they are unlikely to cooperate. I sat with that. I had not even thought about a criminal case. I had been so focused on the will, on the money, on the family of the side of it. I had not thought about the law in a different way. I said, Mr. Albright, I do not want to put my son on a witness stand. I do not want him to relive that. He said, I understand. There may be a middle path. We could send a formal letter from my office, putting your sister on notice that we are aware that a crime may have been committed, that we are preserving the right to pursue it, and that any further contact, by her or your father or your stepmother, will be considered harassment and added to the file. Sometimes a letter is enough. I said, send the letter. He said, I will draft it tonight. You will see the draft tomorrow morning. I hung up. I sat in the kitchen of my little house in Folsom. I poured myself a small glass of wine. I thought about how, 2 weeks earlier, I had been a single mother in a peeling minivan with a son in a chair held together by hope and duct tape, and now I was a woman with lawyers and protective orders and a foundation and a son in a brand new chair that had arrived in 24 hours. The change had not happened to me. The change had happened around me. Inside, I was the same woman who had carried Mateo out of that dining room. I was just standing in a different room now. I drank my wine. I watched the second hand on the kitchen clock move all the way around once. Then I went to bed. The letter from Mr. Albright reached Marlena on Friday, December 5th. I know this because Marlena called my clinic on Friday afternoon, having apparently figured out that she could not reach me on my cell phone. She left a long, weeping voicemail with the receptionist, who, bless her, transcribed it for me word for word on a yellow sticky note. The voicemail said, Camilla, please, you have to call me back. This is insane. You are going to ruin my life over an accident. I did not mean to drop him. The chair was wobbly. This is going too far. Please, sis, we are family. The receptionist had also written in small letters at the bottom of the sticky note, she sounded drunk, in my opinion. I did not call back. I did not even read the sticky note twice. I put it in the file folder I had started in my desk drawer at home, the one labeled documentation. That weekend, my father tried something new. He drove the 3 hours from Juniper Lane to my house in Folsom and parked at the end of the street. He did not come to the door. He just sat in his car, a silver Cadillac with the engine running. My neighbor Henrietta saw him from her front window and called me. I called Mr. Albright. Mr. Albright called a local off-duty officer he had on retainer for client safety, a kind man named Officer Marcus who arrived in plain clothes within 40 minutes. Officer Marcus walked over to the Cadillac, knocked on the window, and had a quiet conversation with my father. My father drove away. Officer Marcus came to my front door afterward. He said, Ma'am, he was not committing a crime by parking on a public street, but I made it clear that any further presence in this neighborhood will be reported as harassment. He gave me a worried look. He said, I would suggest installing a security camera if you do not have one. Front and back. I will give you the name of a company. I installed the cameras the next day. I had a man in a white van put them up while Mateo watched with delighted curiosity. Mateo had decided that the cameras were like the ones in spy movies, and he and the installer spent 15 minutes inventing code names for each angle. That week, I also did something I had been thinking about for a long time. I started looking at houses. Not a mansion, not anything ostentatious. I had no interest in being one of those women in a magazine. I just wanted a house that was safer. I wanted a small piece of land, a fenced yard, a long driveway. I wanted Mateo to have a room with a wider door for his chair. I wanted a workshop, because he had been telling me for 2 years that what he wanted most in the world was a place to build things, like his great-grandfather, who had once let him use a real screwdriver. I found a place outside of Folsom, on a quiet road, with 5 acres of land and a single-story farmhouse from the 1960s that had been renovated by a couple who were moving for a job. It had wide hallways. It had a wheelchair-accessible bathroom that the previous owners had built for their mother who never moved in. It had a barn that could be turned into a workshop. I went to see it on a Tuesday afternoon while Mateo was at school. I stood in the empty kitchen and I cried, because the light through the window was the exact light of my grandfather of kitchen in the stone house above Carmel. I bought it in cash. The closing happened 10 days later. The total price was $840,000, which my new financial advisor, a woman named Soria who Mr. Albright had connected me with, told me was a perfectly responsible decision and that I should stop apologizing every time I spent money. I told Matteo about the new house the night we closed. He was eating spaghetti. He stopped with the fork halfway to his mouth and he said, "A barn, a real barn." I said, "A real barn, with electricity. And you can have your own workshop in part of it when you are a little older, with real tools, safe ones, your size." He said, "Mom, this is the best day of my life." I said, "Mine too, baby." We moved on the weekend of December 20th. Henrietta helped pack, which is to say she sat on my couch and gave directions and held Matteo on her lap. 3 movers from a small company brought their truck and we loaded up the 17 years of stuff Daniel and I and then Matteo and I had accumulated. I did not bring everything. I left the old couch we had bought at a thrift store. I left the chipped kitchen table. I brought the things that mattered. Daniel of refinished rocking chair, the ceramic bowl, the book with the folded envelope inside it, my mother of recipe cards. The first night in the new house, Matteo and I ate pizza on the floor of the living room because the furniture had not been delivered yet. I had not bought any new furniture. I had only ordered a bed for Matteo and one for me, and a small kitchen table, and a couch that would arrive in January. The house was almost empty, and it was beautiful that way. Matteo, lying on a sleeping bag on the floor, said, "Mom, are we rich now?" I had been waiting for that question. I said, "Baby, we are very lucky now. Great-grandpa Augustin left us a lot of money before he died, more than I ever thought we would have, and we are going to use it carefully. We are going to take care of ourselves, and we are going to take care of other people who need help. Mostly we are going to keep being us. We are still going to eat pizza on the floor sometimes. We are still going to go to the same school. We are still going to ride bikes and read books and build things. The money is not who we are. It is just a thing we have now, like a really good tool." He thought about that for a while. Then he said, "Mom, can we use some of the money to get other kids wheelchairs? Like the kids you said wait a long time at your clinic." I had not told him about the foundation. He had remembered on his own, from a conversation I had had with Henrietta on the phone 2 weeks earlier when he was supposed to be doing homework. I said, "Matteo, that is exactly what I am going to do with most of it." He nodded. He said, "Good." Then he turned over in his sleeping bag and said, "I am going to design one, the wheelchairs. I am going to make them better. Mine has a thing that wobbles. I have ideas." I said, "I cannot wait to see your ideas." He was asleep in 90 seconds. I lay on my own sleeping bag and watched the ceiling fan turn slowly above me, and I listened to the sounds of a house I had not yet learned. The settling of the floorboards. The hum of the refrigerator. A coyote, very far away, calling once. The next morning I called Mr. Albright and I told him I wanted to formally launch the expansion of the foundation in the new year. He said, "Camilla, that is wonderful. We will need to assemble a small board, develop a budget, hire an executive director. I would suggest you take the title of chairperson but not try to run the day-to-day. You have a life. You have a son. Your role is the vision. Other people of role is the execution." I said, "Yes, that sounds right." He said, "One more thing. The formal reading of the will is next Tuesday, December 23rd. As we discussed, your family is not invited because they are not named. But I want you to know that I will be sending them a final notification letter that day, confirming that the will has been read, that the estate has transferred, and that no further contact with my office on the subject of inheritance will be entertained. After Tuesday, in the eyes of the law, this is settled." I said, "Good." He said, "There is one more thing, and I almost did not bring it up. But I think you should know. Your father went to a different attorney this week, a more aggressive one, and tried to retain him for a contest. The attorney called me, professional courtesy, and told me he had declined to take the case. He said the documentation we have is ironclad. He said your father showed up with no evidence beyond the assertion that he had been your grandfather of son-in-law and that he believed he deserved something. The attorney told your father that he had no case. Your father, apparently, became extremely upset, and the attorney asked him to leave. I sat with that for a moment. I said, Mr. Albright, thank you for telling me. He said, Camilla, I have been a lawyer for 41 years. I have seen a lot of estates. I want you to know something, woman to, well, lawyer to client. You are handling this with more grace than almost anyone I have ever represented. Your grandfather chose well. I said, thank you, I think I am still in shock. He said, that is perfectly normal. Give yourself time, be kind to yourself, and if I may, take your son to do something fun this week. Something that has nothing to do with any of this. Children are barometers, he has been through something too. I took Mateo to a Children of Science museum that Saturday. He spent an hour in a room full of gears and pulleys. He built a small machine that lifted a marble up a ramp using a system of strings and a hand crank. He explained it to a stranger, a little girl about his age, and the little girl listened with her chin in her hands. He was happy. He was just a kid in a green wheelchair at a museum with his mom on a Saturday. I watched him and I thought this is what $9 billion is for. Not the house, not the cars I had not bought, not the dresses I was never going to wear. The freedom to take him to a museum on a Saturday and not have to look at my watch and not have to count the minutes until the next shift. The freedom to listen to him for a whole hour without my brain doing the math on the electric bill. For the first time since Thanksgiving, I felt something that was not exhaustion or anger or grief. I felt something quiet. I think it was peace. The reading of the will happened on Tuesday, December 23rd, at 10 in the morning, in the conference room above the office of Mr. Albright in Carmel. The conference room had tall windows that looked out toward a row of cypress trees, and beyond them, a strip of gray Pacific Ocean. I drove up the night before and stayed in a small hotel 2 blocks from the beach. Mateo stayed with Henrietta again. He had been with her so much lately that he had started calling her bonus grandma, which had made her cry the first time he said it. The reading itself was, in fact, anticlimactic. There were 3 people in the room: Mr. Albright, his junior associate Sebastian, and me. Mr. Albright read the will out loud from start to finish, in his careful, quiet voice. It took 40 minutes. I had heard most of it before. I let it wash over me. At the end, I signed 17 documents and initialed 42 pages. When we were done, Mr. Albright stood up and shook my hand. He said, Camilla, officially, on behalf of the estate of Augustin Vega, congratulations. The transfer is complete. I said, thank you. I do not really know what else to say. He said, you do not have to say anything. You have already said it just by being who you are. I drove back to Folsom that afternoon. I picked up Mateo from Henrietta of house. We had dinner together, the 3 of us, take-out Chinese food eaten on Henrietta of couch while we watched a Christmas movie. Mateo fell asleep on her shoulder. Henrietta looked at me over his head and said, Camilla, I do not know what is happening in your life, but I see you. I am here. I said, I know, I will tell you soon. I am still figuring out how to say it. She said, you take all the time you need. Christmas morning was small and perfect. Mateo opened presents on the rug in our new living room. I had not gone overboard. A new set of building blocks, the engineering kind with gears and motors. A book about a boy who became an astronaut. A small toolbox with real but child-sized tools. He looked at the toolbox for a long time and then he hugged it. He said, Mom, I am going to be so careful with these. I said, I know you are, baby. I gave Henrietta her gift, which was a card that had a check inside it. The check was for $50,000. I had written on the card, for 19 years of being family when family was not. Use this however you want. Travel, pay off the house, buy something silly, you are loved. Henrietta opened it on her own front porch when she came over for Christmas brunch. She held the check in her hand and she looked at it for a long, long minute. Then she looked up at me. She said, Camilla, what is this? What have you done? I said, Henrietta, sit down. I want to tell you the whole thing. We sat on her own porch. I told her everything. The Thanksgiving dinner, the phone call from Mr. Albright, the number, the foundation, the letters, my father in the car at the end of the street, all of it. It took almost an hour. Henrietta did not interrupt me once. When I was done, she said, sweet baby Jesus, Camilla. I said, I know. She said, are you okay? I said, I think so, I am starting to be. She said, and the check? I said, Henrietta, you have been the closest thing I have had to family for half a decade. You took my son in when I needed it. You did not ask me a single question this whole month. You let me figure out what I needed to do. $50,000 is nothing in the context of what I have inherited, but it is something to you, and that is the point. You deserve a thing. She started crying. She said, Camilla, I cannot accept this. I said, you can and you will, and that is the end of that conversation. Now come inside. I made cinnamon rolls. She came inside. She ate cinnamon rolls. She hugged Mateo so hard he laughed and said, Bonus, Grandma, you are squishing me. It was a good morning. The new year came quietly. On January 2nd of 2026, I started the work of expanding the foundation. Mr. Albright had connected me with a woman named Imani DeVuro, a former pediatric hospital administrator who had run nonprofits for 15 years. She came over to my house, and we sat at my new kitchen table, and we drew out a plan on a yellow legal pad. We talked about partnerships with hospitals. We talked about an application process for families. We talked about a fast-track program for children whose insurance had denied a needed piece of equipment. We talked about manufacturing partnerships to bring the cost down. We talked, eventually, about hiring children of design consultants, including, when he was old enough, my son. Imani said, at one point, Camilla, I have to ask, why this? Why mobility equipment for kids? I said, because 3 weeks ago my son was on the floor of a dining room with a broken wheelchair, and the only reason I could replace it the next day was that I happened to have access to an enormous amount of money. There are millions of mothers who do not have access to that. They have a kid on the floor with a broken chair and no way to fix it. I cannot fix all of it, but I can fix some of it, and I want to fix it fast. Imani nodded. She wrote something on her legal pad. She said, then that is our mission. Speed and access. We will not be the foundation that takes 9 months to approve an application. We will be the foundation that ships a chair in 24 hours. I said, yes, that is exactly what we will be. By mid-January, the foundation, which I had renamed the Augustin and Mateo Vega Mobility Fund, had a working board of 6 people, a budget for the year, a website under construction, and a partnership pending with 3 pediatric hospitals in California. The press release went out the last week of January. A reporter called for an interview. I declined. Imani did the interview instead, showing a 4-year-old girl in a new pink chair of our foundation. My son Mateo said it was a good trade. 2 days later, the father of Mateo, my own father, sent a text asking for money because his family was struggling. I deleted it. He sent more angry texts. I sent them to Mr. Albright. We obtained a restraining order against my father, Yvette, and Marlena. The judge granted it quickly. I felt tired, not triumphant, because a small part of me hoped my father would apologize. He never did. I sat on the porch of my new house and thought of the mother of Mateo, my own mother. Later, I attended a school board meeting. A mother named Ramona said the school elevator was broken and her son in a wheelchair was isolated. I stood up and offered to pay $47,000 to fix it, plus fund an accessibility audit. The room was quiet. Ramona cried and thanked me. I told my friend Henrietta. She said I sounded like a leader. I said I just wanted elevators to work. The news covered the elevator repair simply. Then, a woman named Jolene emailed about the daughter of Jolene, Faith, who needed a power wheelchair. We expedited the request and delivered the chair. Jolene sent a photo of Faith sleeping in it. I knew the foundation was real. I wrote a final letter to Yvette, stating I would never return, send money, or attend their funerals. I told her they lost me when I was 11. I mailed it and never heard from them again. It is now early summer in the year 2025. Mateo is riding a modified tricycle. The foundation has funded 147 pieces of mobility equipment. Imani is the executive director. Our office has a bowl of green apples to honor Mr. Albright. The broken wheelchair of Mateo sits in the office as a reminder of why we started. The school elevator was fixed, and we funded a new accessible playground. I watched a boy named Diego laugh on the playground. My father lost his real estate company, and his house went on the market. Marlena moved in with her boyfriend. Yvette is a closed door to me now. I kept the old minivan and had it restored to its original pale gold color. It is the vehicle that carried us away from my past. I had coffee with Mr. Albright. He said my grandfather left me the inheritance so I would have the resources to walk away when my family finally showed their true colors. Later, I watched Mateo build a wooden ramp with Henrietta. I want mothers to know this. Family is not the people who share your blood. Family is the people who choose you. It is okay to walk away from people who hurt your child. The cost of staying is paid by the child. I would want her to know that you do not need to inherit $9 billion to leave. You only need to inherit yourself. You only need to remember that the small girl inside you, the one who watched her mother of kitchen get rearranged, the one who read books at the back of family parties, the one who carried her son out of a dining room with a broken chair, that small girl is still in there, and she has been waiting her whole life for you to take her side. You can take her side today. You do not need a lawyer of permission. You do not need a phone call. You can decide this afternoon, while you are reading these words, that the next time someone laughs at your child, you will not laugh along to keep the peace. You will pick your child up. You will walk out. That is the inheritance I really got from my grandfather. Not the money. The money is a tool, and I am using it. But the real inheritance was the letter. The real inheritance was a man who had been watching for 30 years, who had taken notes in fountain pen, who had decided quietly that the only person worth handing his life of work to was the woman who had asked for nothing. He saw me, that was the gift, the money was just the wrapping paper. Mateo asked me last night, before bed, "Mom, are we happy now?" I said, "Baby, I think we are happy. Are you?" He said, "Yes, I am happy. I miss Dad sometimes. I miss great-grandpa, but I am happy." I said, "You are allowed to miss them and be happy. Both things are true." He said, "I know." He thought about it. He said, "Mom, when I grow up, I want to run the foundation with you." I said, "You can. You absolutely can. You can run it without me eventually when I am old. You can hand it to your own kids." He said, "Cool." Then he yawned and closed his eyes and was asleep. I sat on the edge of his bed for a long time. I watched him breathe. The light from the hallway made a yellow stripe across his blanket. Fig the dog was curled at the foot of the bed, snoring. If you have been listening to this story, and you have made it all the way here with me, thank you. Thank you for sitting with my family and our broken chair and our long drive home. If any part of this story made you think of your own life, or your own father, or your own dining room, I hope you will be gentle with yourself this week. I hope you will remember that you are allowed to walk out. I hope, if you have a child who has been laughed at by people who should have protected them, you will pick that child up tonight and tell them you saw it, and you are sorry, and it will not happen again on your watch. If this story meant something to you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel so more stories like this one can find the people who need them. And in the comments, I would love to hear from you. Tell me about a moment in your own life when you finally walked out, or finally walked in, to the family you actually deserved. I will read every single one. Take care of yourselves. Take care of the small girl or the small boy inside you. And remember, the loudest person in the room is almost never the richest person in the room is almost never the kindest, and the kindest person in the room is the only one worth following home.